15 of the best blue dresses in cinematic history. Considering this is the 5th episode of this series, I'm sure you're already familiar with the premise. But for any new viewers, today we're going to be taking a look at 15 of the best blue dresses in film. As always, the dresses will be listed in no particular order, and we'll be focusing on blue outfits with an interesting backstory, important symbolic meaning, a lasting cultural legacy, or simply look spectacular. There are tons of movies with amazing costume design that could be featured in this series, but for the sake of keeping things interesting, I'll be keeping repeats to a minimum, except when absolutely necessary. So before you get upset about a certain outfit from a certain movie not making the cut, there's a possibility it's already been discussed in a different episode. It's also important to keep in mind that I haven't seen every single film ever made, and there's a high chance that I might omit a dress that you consider one of the best. So feel free to leave a comment down below if you didn't see your favorite. And it has to be said, but this is based on my personal preference. So if you see a recurring theme when it comes to the types of dresses included in this series, that's probably why. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. The 10 Commandments. During the 1950s, Hollywood was all about the historical epic, and The 10 Commandments is perhaps one of the best remembered films to come out of that craze, receiving several Academy Award nominations, becoming one of the highest grossing films of the decade, and remaining an Easter time staple to this day. The film, which dramatizes the story of the biblical figure Moses, was the most expensive ever made, at the time at least, and featured an A-list cast, hundreds of costumes, thousands of extras, and incredibly elaborate sets. Paramount's chief costumer, Edith Head, was tasked with leading a team that included 4 other credited designers: Ralph Jester, John Jensen, Dorothy Jenkins, and Arnold Freiberg. Although all of these costume designers were involved with the project in some capacity, it's likely that Edith Head was the one responsible for dressing the film's leading ladies, with many of those garments featuring her signature flair for glamour. A product of her time, Head wasn't a stickler for historical accuracy, opting for bright colors and unique shapes to make her designs, and the actors, shine on screen. A tactic which certainly worked in her favor, as she soon became a favorite of many Hollywood actresses and was nominated for 35 Academy Awards over the course of her career, hence her nickname, the Queen of Costume Design. You might also recognize her as the inspiration behind Edna Mode in The Incredibles. Although Head's penchant for glamorous gowns was undeniable, she was also a firm believer in designing costumes that reflected the character's personality, something that's evident in the 10 Commandments. Princess Nefertiti, played by Anne Baxter, is as beautiful as she is arrogant, vengeful, and lustful, traits which are all reflected in her attire. Although in a comfortable position, she's seen as a prize, not a person, so her appearance is her source of power, the only way that she can fight back. Her color palette is bright and bold, with blues, greens, and reds, as an homage to ancient Egyptian art and the Nile River. These colors also make her match the pharaoh, showing how her fate and identity is intertwined with his. She also wears a good deal of white, which is believed to have been the most popular color for clothing in Egypt for practical reasons, and I enjoy the juxtaposition of such an innocent color on someone so haughty. Many of Nefertiti's dresses feature gold embroidery, a reference to the popularity of the material in Egypt, which also allows the audience to immediately understand her position at court and her affluent background. When she's attempting to assert her dominance over others, she wears gowns made entirely of silver and gold, highlighting her superficiality and vanity, as well as her status. Even her more simple garments have similar connotations, as they draw inspiration from other expensive materials that were in use at the time, like malachite, lapis lazuli, red jasper, mother of pearl, and turquoise. The latter is my favorite look in the film, as it's as sexy as it is elegant, and she really does look the part of a treacherous peacock. The silhouette and color of Nefertiti's garments, as well as her accessorizing, creates a stark contrast to the more down-to-earth and dutiful Zephora, highlighting how different the two women are at their very core, as well as their opposing allegiances. Ancient Egyptians wore clothing made of linen, which was spun out of the flax plant, and was durable in addition to being lightweight, making it perfect for the hot climate. There were different qualities of linen, with the finest being reserved for nobility, who fashioned them into styles that further highlighted their rank. Based on a handful of surviving garments, in addition to artistic depictions, it's believed that Egyptian royals wore pleated linen robes, and we can see the effect mimicked in Nefertiti chiffon gowns and capes. By using chiffon, many of Nefertiti's dresses have a sheer effect, once again tying into her more seductive nature. In addition to this, their weightlessness also makes her appear carefree, emphasizing how removed she is from the atrocities happening right outside of her window. Despite the contemporary influences like the fabric type, artificial colors, and styling, these looks are incredibly reminiscent of what is depicted in surviving ancient Egyptian artwork, and I definitely prefer this sort of interpretation compared to the Las Vegas-y direction seen in 1963's Cleopatra, which I think looks more tacky than it does regal. Samson and Delilah. Samson and Delilah was basically a trial run of the Ten Commandments. Both were historical epics centered around a biblical story, both were directed by Cecil B. DeMille, and both had costume teams led by Edith Head. Samson and Delilah was the only one to win the Oscar for Best Costume Design, but admittedly, competition wasn't as tough in 1949 as it was when the Ten Commandments was in the running years later. Although the entire costume team shared the award, Edith Head has been acknowledged as the sole designer for the costumes worn by Hedy Lamarr as the titular Delilah. The character routinely wears two-piece sets, with the silhouette and embroidery drawing parallels to ancient Minoan clothing, while the amount of bare skin highlights her role as a femme fatale. Delilah uses her appearance to her advantage, dressing in whatever manner her target will find most appealing. When she's with Samson, her clothing is more simple and subdued, luring him into a false sense of security and making her appear more innocent. With the Philistines, she takes to wearing gaudier attire, mirroring their own clothing, which is representative of greed, treachery, and selfishness. The dress that Delilah wears in the finale is her least revealing outfit, demonstrating the power and authority that she's obtained through her betrayal of Samson, no longer needing to rely on her sexuality. To tie into this idea, Edith Head had initially thought of making a gown dyed to resemble a peacock, prompting the director to ask, quote, "So why not use real peacock feathers?" At the time, there was a shortage, but DeMille actually owned several peacocks himself, and when molting season came around, the production was able to get their hands on over 2,000 feathers. These were sewn and glued onto both the dress and its accompanying cape, creating a jaw-dropping ensemble that makes Delilah look imposing and beautiful. Now, Edith Head didn't come up with the idea for the dress completely on her own, as she was actually referencing a costume created for Theda Bara in the 1917 silent film Cleopatra, but it feels like a perfect fit for this film and character. House of Flying Daggers. The film takes place in 859 AD, not long before the fall of the Tang dynasty, which has been called China's Golden Age because of its economic, social, and cultural achievements. Two police captains, Jin and Leo, are ordered to find and kill the leader of the House of Flying Daggers, a rebel group that is beloved by the common people. Jin goes undercover and visits the Peony Pavilion brothel, which is supposedly housing one of the group's members, May, a beautiful dancer who also happens to be blind. Or at least she seems to be. When May first appears, she's in a blue floral rue, an overcoat, and the high collar and stiff shape make her appear more reserved than her fellow courtesans, who are in gauzy dresses and giggling away. Underneath, she's wearing a dashu-shen, literally translated as large-sleeved gown, which was typically worn on special occasions by nobles, concubines, and entertainers. As the name suggests, the style featured large sleeves, but the film exaggerates the effect to make May's dances more dramatic and graceful, with her sleeves being up to 16 feet long. It might not have been intentional, but the visual of May's sleeves coiling in and out reminds me of a snake striking, perhaps foreshadowing how dangerous she actually is. Her outfits at the pavilion are pastel-colored and elegant, highlighting her femininity and lulling the men into a false sense of security. They only see her as a beautiful blind dancer, instead of the formidable martial artist that she is. The dress is the same bright shade of blue as her cohorts, while the pattern matches the pavilion, representing her attempt to hide in plain sight. However, the garment's embroidery creates a greater sense of luxury and opulence, making it obvious to the audience that May is more important than the other girls. The color also foreshadows where her heart truly lies, with May and Jin matching, whereas when she performs for Leo, her pastel pink ensemble is a stark contrast to his dark greens and moody reds. Clothing of the Tang dynasty was more flamboyant than the austere Han dynasty or the frugal Song dynasty, with fashions of the time featuring vivid colors, intricate patterns, and flowing silhouettes, which reflected the romantic and rich cultural characteristics of the era. The most popular color during the time period was actually red, intended to highlight the dynasty's prosperity, and it was often paired with green to create a stark contrast that was considered fashionable. While purple was reserved for nobility in Europe at this time, in China, gold and yellow was taboo, evolving into a symbol of imperial power. Mei has on a huetian, an ornamental makeup style that was popular during the Tang dynasty, with the markings being considered a sign of the wearer's beauty and charm. Mei appears to be wearing the plum blossom style, which was not only the most common, but is also a reference to her name, which is Chinese for plum. Mei is also wearing a fengguan, a type of traditional headdress worn by high-ranking individuals, which is also called a phoenix crown, so named because of its inclusion of phoenix motifs, which were symbolic of virtue and grace in China. The soft tinkling sound the fengguan makes was considered especially attractive at the time, and it even became fashionable to wear similar charms on one's clothing to create even more melodic sounds. Romeo and Juliet. When it comes to Romeo and Juliet adaptations, 2013's is often swept under the rug, mainly because it uses a minimal amount of Shakespeare's original dialogue, which many critics considered sacrilege. But since we already have the more faithful 1968 version, not to mention the dozens of other interpretations of the story that we've seen over the years, I'm fine with the deviation from the source material. In Shakespeare's original play, Juliet is about to turn 14, while Romeo is a few years older than her. But most contemporary adaptations ignore this fact for logistical and legal reasons. With Haley Steinfeld being 15 at the time of filming, while Douglas Booth was 19, this movie does a better job at representing their original ages than most. Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio had the same age difference in the 1996 film, but Danes was a few years older than Steinfeld was, so it isn't quite as shocking to see it play out on screen. It's important to remember that the story is about the foolishness of youth just as much as it is the transcendence of love, so I think having such obviously young protagonists works in the film's favor, rationalizing Romeo's fickleness and Juliet's naivete. Set in Verona during the Italian Renaissance, the costumes emulate the look of the late 15th century, with lush fabrics, high waistlines, and thick skirts. However, the actual construction of the garments are more contemporary, with Juliet's dresses simply imitating the silhouette of the era, instead of actually having different layers like a giornea or a gamurra. Throughout the film, Juliet gravitates towards pastels, blue most frequently, and she's wearing the color when she and Romeo first meet. Although the couple attend this masked ball in most adaptations of the story, Juliet usually winds up revealing her face for one reason or another, giving Romeo an opportunity to spot her beauty and fall in love with her. In this film, they stay masked for most of their flirtation, which I think is pretty funny because
she looks like every other bitch!
And I can't help but think that the mask kind of looks like an upside-down squid. The velvet gown transitions from a light blue to a darker blue, which could represent her evolution from a child to an adolescent. All of Juliet's costumes in the film incorporated crystals from Swarovski, adding more glitz and glam that allude to her family's wealth. The color of the dress, combined with the sparkling adornments, mimics the night sky, and these little details make it appear more luxe than some of the other dresses at the party. Rosaline is actually wearing a somewhat similar dress, but Juliet's looks a touch more interesting, similar to how Romeo also finds her more captivating. We also see her wearing a reta, a netted hair adornment that in more recent times has been called a Juliet cap, so named for the character. You might also see it referred to as a snood, caul, or coif, terms that were used in different regions at different times for similar netted headwear. During the Italian Renaissance, these hairnets were primarily worn by unmarried girls, and the connotation remains in media today, with many films using them to signify a character's youthfulness, playfulness, or innocence. Marie Antoinette. Directed by Sofia Coppola, 2006's Marie Antoinette is a candy-colored delight, with pastel pinks, yellows, and blues covering every inch of the screen. In order to humanize the historical figures, artistic liberties were taken with the source material, with Coppola modernizing different aspects of the film to make them more relatable. This change is most obvious with the title character, with Marie Antoinette being depicted in a similar self-absorbed fashion as the socialites we'd often see on 2000s tabloid covers. While her carefree nature and naivete are part of her initial charm, as time passes, they become a negative, with Marie being loathed by her subjects for her irresponsibility and ignorance. Throughout the film, Marie sports a variety of different dress styles, including robe à la française, robe à l'anglaise, chemise à la reine, robe à la turque, and robe à la polonaise. Much like trends of today, these styles went in and out of fashion at different times, but Marie wears them all interchangeably. Almost every outfit in the film is a delight, but one of the best remembered ensembles is probably the blue gown that she wears when she first arrives at Versailles. This scene is a recreation of what actually happened when Marie crossed the border into France, as she was forced to abandon any connection to her life and country and fully embrace her role as the Dauphine of France. When she leaves Austria, she's seen in a handful of riding habits, which was considered a more casual form of daywear that women wore while traveling. With her hair undone and the more muted color palette, she looks every bit the 14-year-old, making her shift to the bright blue dress all the more stark, as she's dolled up like a grown woman. Her new dress is based on the caraco, an informal style of clothing that emerged in France in the 1760s, which was based on working-class men's jackets. Besides the style being distinctly French in origin, it also makes her appear more humble and relatable to her new subjects, which is ideal for a foreign princess. What really takes this look to the next level is her matching tricorn hat, which was also inspired by menswear of the time period, often being worn by soldiers, showing how her duty is to serve France. This look is just the start of Marie's extravagant wardrobe, with her early outfits highlighting how just like any teenager given free rein, she spends all of her time partying and shopping. Although the costumes in Marie Antoinette are heavily inspired by actual fashions of the time period, with some even being recreations of dresses the real Marie wore, they're heavily stylized to fit the film's more modern direction. The real Marie Antoinette was infamously fond of jewels, but in the film she's accessorized more minimally to highlight her youthfulness and make her appear approachable. The character's numerous shoes were actually designed by Manolo Blahnik, as Coppola felt that if Marie Antoinette had been around today, that was the brand she would have worn.
You know how much Manolos are? You used to wear Manolos.
Well, what statement do you want them to make?
I am beautiful and powerful, and I don't care that you're only 25 and married my ex. I spent $40,000 on shoes, and I have no place to live?
While Marie and those affiliated with her often wear pastel shades, the other courtiers wear jewel tones, immediately showing how she doesn't fit in with those around her. According to costume designer Milena Canonero, Sofia Coppola gifted her a box of macarons from the famous Ladurée pastry shop to serve as a reference for Marie's color palette, and we can even see the treats throughout the film. During the 18th century, desserts, and sugar in general, were a luxury that only the rich could afford. By having Marie's gowns resemble cakes and other treats with their ruffles and trim, it highlights how her lifestyle is out of reach for most, not to mention how she's literally become eye candy. With dental care during the time period lacking, it's also a reminder of how the beauty of the French court was hiding something much more rotten. While many of the costumes in the film were created specifically for it, a handful were taken from Canonero's earlier 18th century films, like Barry Lyndon and The Affair of the Necklace. This is actually pretty common practice for period dramas, and history has since repeated itself, with many of the costumes from Marie Antoinette reappearing in more recent productions. Donkey Skin. A surreal adaptation of the fairy tale Donkey Skin by Charles Perrault, the story is about a king who attempts to marry his own daughter following the death of his wife. The princess, who obviously doesn't want to marry him, seeks help from her fairy godmother, who suggests that she make unbelievable demands to hold off his advances. The princess asks for 3 impossible dresses, one the color of the weather, another the color of the moon, and another the color of the sun. Despite their difficulty, the king is able to grant all of her requests, and she resorts to fleeing the kingdom while wearing a donkey skin as a disguise. With the dresses in the fairy tale being impossible, the costume designers had to push their imaginations to the limit to meet the challenge. The ensembles of the main characters were first imagined by stage costumer Agostino Pace, but they were actually crafted by Git Magrini, who is often credited as the film's sole costume designer. Magrini referenced different eras for the characters, with the king taking inspiration from the Renaissance, the princess the Rococo period, and the fairy Old Hollywood. The princess's first impossible dress was a deep blue and made out of the same material as a movie screen, allowing them to project a moving cloud pattern onto it to create the illusion of the sky. With no rain or thunderstorms, the beautiful weather was symbolic of the king's desire that their future marriage would be a pleasant one. A great sentiment, if he weren't, her dad. The second impossible dress had panels of reflective fabric on it, the same kind that you'd find on running clothes, which made the dress light up the same way the moon does in the night sky. The third impossible dress had the same reflective panels, but on gold lame fabric with gold sequins, creating a warmer tone than the previous dress. And with Catherine Deneuve's similarly colored hair, she honestly looks like a Barbie doll. While I appreciate the creativity that went into bringing these magical dresses to life, my favorite of the princess's dresses is actually the blue gown that she wears when the king first tells her his plans to marry her. The huge sleeves and floral details really make her look like she's being swallowed up by her circumstances, and the color makes her match the various elements of the kingdom, from the horses to the servants to her father. All of Deneuve's outfits, including the real donkey skin, were incredibly heavy due to the amount of fabric and embellishments on them, and allegedly she would be followed around the set with a stool, which would be slid under her petticoats to allow her to rest between takes. Talk about commitment. Beauty and the Beast. Don't worry, we're talking about the French version, not Disney's auto-tuned nightmare. Closely inspired by the original fairy tale published in 1740, this version of Beauty and the Beast includes many details that are ignored in other adaptations. In the film, Belle's family have lost their fortune, something her two spoiled sisters constantly whine about, although Belle is just happy that they're all together. In the hopes of retrieving some of his assets, Belle's father goes on a journey, only to lose his way and stumble upon the Beast's castle. While there, he's given food, shelter, and money, but he can't help but take a beautiful rose from the garden, the one thing that Belle had requested as a gift. Enraged, the Beast demands that he remain in the castle, but Belle offers to take her father's place. Every evening, Belle is commanded to have dinner with the Beast, who attempts to woo her, only to be coldly rejected each time. After finding out that her father is ill, Belle requests to return home, which the Beast allows, also giving her a healing potion. When she arrives at home, her older brother sees how luxurious her clothing is, and determining that the Beast's castle likely holds other treasures, he decides to invade. During this attack, the Beast is mortally wounded, but before he dies, Belle admits her love for him, which turns him back into a human. The highlight of this film is without a doubt its production design, with the scenery and costuming looking every bit as magical as the story it's based on, although the CGI dogs are definitely a bit off-putting. Unlike most Beauty and the Beast adaptations, Belle's gowns are more reminiscent of fashions of the 16th century Elizabethan era than they are of the 18th century Rococo period. This is evidenced from the round shape of her skirts, which resembles the farthingale, the puffed leg of mutton sleeves, and the triangle stomacher. The attention to detail in all of the costumes is actually astounding, having intricate embroidery, gorgeous smocking, and stunning silhouettes. While all of Belle's gowns are impressive, my favorite is her blue dress, which she wears when she and the Beast dance together and when he foils her escape attempt. The difference in color perfectly encapsulates their dynamic, antagonistic, while the subtle similarities, like the rough collars and puffed sleeves, imply that their relationship may be changing for the better. While the blue is impossible to miss when she's walking around the castle, it's the perfect color for her escape, helping her blend into the icy night, even if she ultimately fails. Cinderella. My favorite of Disney's recent live-action remakes, 2015 Cinderella benefits from a charming cast, a simple approach to the source material, and jaw-dropping costume design courtesy of Sandy Powell. Although Lady Tremaine has the strongest wardrobe overall, my favorite outfit in the film is without a doubt Ella's ball gown, which none of Disney's other live-actions have come close to surpassing. To create the film's fantastical look, Powell mixed fashions of the 19th century with the 20th century, giving each character a unique blend of time periods that created a distinct silhouette. In Lady Tremaine's case, she takes notes from the 1880s and the 1940s, while the stepsisters are a gaudy 1830s meets 1980s mess. Ella's blue dress is inspired by mid-Victorian evening wear, with just a dash of 1950s post-war glamour, resulting in the classic ball gown silhouette that we all know and love. Ella's dress includes little butterfly motifs, an homage to her father, and a symbol of her physical and emotional transformation. Although I'm one of the biggest Cinderella's dress was actually silver defenders on the internet, I think the switch to blue was actually a great choice for the film. Each of the characters was given a specific color palette that made them instantly recognizable, with Powell saying, quote, "I thought of it as a picture book, how it's graphic and bright. You can tell who everybody is from the color they're wearing." Lady Tremaine is always in green, Drizella wears yellow, Anastasia wears pink, and both Ella and the prince gravitate towards blue, setting them up as a pair. The color is often symbolic of peace, honesty, and loyalty, which I would consider Ella's defining traits. At the ball, Ella is the only person wearing the specific shade of blue, helping her stand out in the sea of beautiful dresses, emphasizing how the prince only has eyes for her, and it's truly one of the most magical moments I've seen put to film. Because Lily James had to wear the dress while doing so many things, 8 different versions were made, some having holes in the sides to accommodate harnesses, while others were shorter so she could run more easily. The large skirt was made of layer upon layer of lightweight silk in blue, turquoise, and lavender, giving the color more depth while also exaggerating her movements. The outermost layer of the skirt was embroidered with thousands of Swarovski crystals, creating a dreamlike shimmering effect, which was intended to make her look like she'd stepped out of a watercolor painting. Swarovski was also tasked with designing Cinderella's iconic glass slipper, and although a real pair were made, they weren't actually worn by Lily James in the film, as the solid crystal made them weigh over 2 pounds, making them impossible to walk in. So the ones that we see her wear in the film are just CGI recreations. The Secret of Moonacre. A fantasy film based on a little-known children's book probably isn't the most obvious contender for this list, but I've got to give credit where credit's due. Released in 2008, The Secret of Moonacre follows Maria Merriweather, an orphan who is forced to leave her life in London to live with her uncle at the mysterious Moonacre Manor. While there, Maria uncovers an age-old family rivalry and is tasked with finding a magical pearl necklace to end the conflict once and for all. The antagonistic families have equally opposing costumes, with the Merriweathers being more frilly and feminine, often wearing florals and pastels, while the Denoirs are edgy and masculine, with leather pants and black jackets. Although set in Victorian-era London, the costumes stray from historical accuracy in favor of whimsy and fantasy, and I'd describe the outfits as steampunk-esque. Throughout the film, we see Maria wearing a Vivienne Westwood orb pendant, and I'd actually bet that the brand's signature dramatic flair inspired the unconventional direction of the costumes. In the late 19th century, women's dresses began moving their volume towards the rear, a shape that was achieved through the use of a bustle that was worn underneath their skirts. Although traditionally hidden from view, Maria's bustles are built into the back of her dress, creating an irregular shape and movement that looks otherworldly, highlighting how she isn't your average Victorian girl. The metal frame of the bustle was intended to evoke the imagery of a cage, and combined with her proper corsets and bloomers, we can understand that Maria feels trapped and stifled by her circumstances, hence why she wears more relaxed silhouettes as time passes. The Wizard of Oz. Although now considered one of the most iconic ensembles in the history of film, bringing Dorothy Gale from the page to the big screen was no easy task. The 1939 film was plagued with production woes, with several different directors taking the reins at different times, and because of these frequent changes in leadership, there were multiple iterations of Dorothy. One of the first challenges was her hair, with Dorothy having looped braids, long curls, and even a blonde blowout at different stages of the production. As for her famous dress, while the silhouette was decided early on, the color was harder to settle, and they tried it out in red and all blue before eventually landing on the famous gingham print. The checked pattern had become a staple of 19th century frontier women, exemplifying the simplicity and frugality of the American plains, and later, in the early 1900s, it was often used for house dresses. This gave the pattern a rustic and domestic connotation, making it the perfect choice for a Kansas farm girl. The production also chose the pattern as they felt it made Judy Garland appear younger, creating an illusion that made her teenage figure less noticeable on camera. The simple frock was quite different from the glamorous gowns that costume designer Gilbert Adrian typically gravitated towards, but with Dorothy intended to be a young orphan, they needed something that captured her innocence. In the original story by L. Frank Baum, Dorothy's slippers were actually silver, but wanting to capitalize on the brand new Technicolor process, they decided red would be the perfect contrast, and thus, history was made. Adrian was also responsible for designing these shoes, and multiple styles were tested, including a unique version with a curled toe, colloquially referred to as the Arabian test pair. Although Judy Garland was quite fond of this shoe, they were ultimately rejected because they were too ostentatious for Dorothy's modest image. The style that was eventually selected were made from white silk pumps from the Inez Shoe Company, which were frequently used by studios because they were inexpensive and easy to dye, and multiple pairs were made for the film because Garland frequently wore them out while dancing. Despite its simplicity, Dorothy's outfit is easily one of the most recognizable and recreated movie costumes, and I think it speaks to the brilliance of the ensemble that if you just wear a blue dress with red shoes, everyone knows who you're referencing. The Wizard of Oz was honestly a pain in the ass from start to finish, so if you want to learn more about the hellish production process, I'd highly recommend checking out the videos by Be Kind Rewind and Kaz Rowe. Scarface. One of the greatest movie entrances of all time goes to Elvira Hancock in Scarface, with Tony Montana, as well as the audience, being immediately smitten by her beauty and cynical attitude. The barely there dress leaves very little to the imagination, immediately setting her up as a femme fatale, and we see her sport similar slinky silhouettes throughout the film. Being treated as nothing more than a piece of meat, Elvira's clothing is symbolic of her lack of agency and independence, as she's unable for even a moment to be seen as unattractive by the men around her. Although the film is set in the early 1980s, Elvira's clothing has more of a 1970s look to it, with costume designer Patricia Norris taking inspiration from Roy Halston. Halston was a prolific fashion designer who was credited for bringing American fashion out of the hippie era and into disco. He specialized in simple and sophisticated designs that were still glamorous, choosing to emphasize the female figure with flowing fabrics and natural shapes. Halston was a favorite of many celebrities, including Angelica Houston, Diana Ross, Cher, and Bianca Jagger, making his designs a staple of the disco era, and Elvira's penchant for the look could be seen as a reflection of her partying lifestyle. Elvira's outfits are a great example of fashion's cyclical nature, with her dresses and suits also having a touch of the 1930s to them, which could be a reference to the original Scarface film from 1932, whose characters are actually dressed quite similarly to their 1983 counterparts. Now, if we're being technical, Elvira's dress is teal, but it leans more blue than it does green. The reason I think a lot of people assume the dress is green is that when she first appears on screen, she's in a small space with yellow lighting, which affects the color. Because I've had enough arguments with people over this, which I don't want continuing in the comments of this video, here are unedited screenshots of Elvira's dress. Notice how the color picker always reads it as blue? Or just look at these color swatches. You can't honestly tell me that they're green. Another piece of evidence for my "it's blue" theory are the real-life recreations of Elvira's outfits, with the people who opt for blue dresses being way more recognizable as the character. The Wolf of Wall Street. 2013's The Wolf of Wall Street is credited as the film that put Margot Robbie on the map, and it's not hard to imagine why, considering in every single scene she's in, you can't help but stare at her the entire time. And I genuinely wonder if Greta Gerwig watched this movie and was like, you know what, that's Barbie. Jordan's first wife, Teresa, is quintessentially 1980s, with giant permed curls, strong shoulder pads, huge floral prints, and light-washed denim, creating a look that modern audiences interpret as frumpy instead of fashionable. Meanwhile, Naomi's clothing looks more 90s, with their sleek, figure-hugging silhouettes highlighting her sex appeal. The character is presented as the stereotypical blonde bombshell, with her entire existence revolving around what Jordan finds appealing. And early on in their relationship, she's molded to fit the image of the perfect Long Island trophy wife. She wears an assortment of luxury designers, including Chanel, Armani, Versace, and even aalyiah, brands that the nouveau riche would have gravitated towards.
You don't understand. This is an aalyiah.
In the pivotal scene where she first meets Jordan, Naomi is wearing a vintage Hervé Leger dress from the 1990s, which hugs her curves and makes her look like a literal model, which the real-life Naomi actually was before her marriage. At the time the film was released, the Hervé Leger bandage dress was actually having a moment, being as ubiquitous to the early 2010s as Jeffrey Campbell Litas, Valentino Rockstuds, and American Apparel skater skirts. Besides bandage dresses appearing on dozens of celebrities like Kim Kardashian, Victoria Beckham, Miranda Kerr, Britney Spears, and Nicki Minaj, the brand also made appearances in other media, like Gossip Girl, Broad City, Burlesque, and American Horror Story. By including the dress in the film, contemporary audiences were able to quickly understand that Naomi was very much that girl. Mr. India. In 1987, Mr. India became one of the highest-grossing Indian films of the year, with lead actress Sridevi winning the hearts of audiences with her quirky character, solidifying her place as one of Bollywood's most popular performers. Throughout the film, the character wears color-coordinated outfits, matching her sweaters to her earrings or wearing a single shade from head to toe. In this spirited dance number, the character wears a blue chiffon sari with a matching bindi, and while you'd think all of the blue would come across as tacky and over the top, there's a sophistication and sensuality to the outfit. You'll notice that compared to other item numbers, the term often used to describe provocative dance sequences, the character is fairly covered up, giving it more versatility and wearability. Although blue eyeshadow wouldn't have been out of place considering it was the 1980s, the production showed restraint, giving her a more natural appearance that audiences found relatable. These monochromatic chiffon saris proceeded to become a trend in the 1990s, with Sridevi being heavily associated with the style, and she even wore similar looks in several of her other films. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find the costume designer for this movie, so if anyone knows who it is, please let me know in the comments. What a Girl Wants. I know that this is a pretty random choice, but considering Daphne's dress has been living in my head rent-free for the last 20 years, I couldn't bring myself to not include it. Initially gifted to Daphne by her wicked stepmother-to-be in the hopes of embarrassing her at the ball, the original dress is an unappealing swamp green color with a ridiculous amount of ruffles that do absolutely nothing for her figure. Ever the original, Daphne decides to alter the dress to better suit her personal style, which is more trendy and relaxed than the posh and stuffy Brits. Taking the dress's blue satin lining, she fashions herself a figure-hugging gown with high leg slits and an asymmetric neckline, a 2000 staple that was all over the runways at the time. According to costume designer Shea Cunliffe, they left the edges of the dress raw and unfinished, so it would actually look like Daphne had made it herself. And it does sort of remind me of those thrift flip videos that are popular now on TikTok. Compared to the other girls' poofy, princessy ball gowns, which are covered in old-fashioned lace, Daphne's dress is more minimal and effortless, mirroring her easygoing personality, something that can also be seen in the styling of the outfit, with Daphne being the only girl without a tight updo, hoity-toity gloves, and excessive pearls. Crazy Rich Asians. Based on the 2013 novel of the same name, the 2018 adaptation of Crazy Rich Asians was a critical and commercial success, becoming the highest-grossing rom-com of the 2010s and starting a wave of Asian-led Hollywood films. The movie's director, John M. Chu, used The Wizard of Oz as a point of reference, drawing parallels between Rachel and Dorothy. When the film begins in New York, aka Kansas, everything is neutral and dull, with the scenery and Rachel's clothing being predominantly black, white, gray, and tan. It's only after she gets to Singapore, or the Land of Oz, that her world explodes with color. Initially, she's a fish out of water, failing to fit in with both the old and new money families, and her simple clothing makes her stand out like a sore thumb. But as time passes, she begins to adapt to her new environment, something reflected in her attire. Although I personally prefer the striped Missoni halter dress that Rachel wears to meet Nick's family for the first time, most people remember the blue dress that she wears to the wedding. Described as the character's Cinderella moment, she wears the dress when she finally takes a stand against Eleanor, showing her that she doesn't intend to go down without a fight. Interestingly, Eleanor is wearing a similarly colored dress, perhaps as a representation of what they have in common, namely, their love for Nick. But the contradictory silhouettes emphasize their ongoing battle and differing personalities. Eleanor's dress, by Elie Saab, is structured and rigid, mirroring how she's set in her ways, as well as her lack of compassion for Rachel's circumstances. Meanwhile, Rachel's dress is soft and dreamy, showing how she's still hopeful about turning the situation around. Like a lot of clothes in the film, Rachel's dress was pulled straight from the runway, with Marchesa loaning it out from their Fall/Winter 2016 collection. Originally, the dress had gigantic billowing sleeves and a matching floral choker, which the production removed during filming. According to costume designer Mary E. Vaught, she wanted Rachel to look vulnerable while in Singapore, so her arms are often left exposed, just like they are in this dress. I also think it was altered for simple logistical reasons, as actress Constance Wu is only 5'1", meaning the original dress probably would have looked like it was wearing her instead of the other way around. Case in point, Gigi Hadid would wear the runway version of the gown during a cameo appearance in the 2018 film Ocean's 8, but she was able to hold her own against all of the fabric. What's your favorite blue dress in film? And what dresses are you hoping to see in the purple episode? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!